Today, I have the good fortune of speaking with Mr. Matthew McConaughey, who's one of America's most recognizable actors, and I guess, according to his peers, also one of America's best actors, as he's won an Academy Award and multiple other awards. And we started to communicate about a year ago, and he's also been on my daughter's podcast. And Matthew recently wrote a book, Greenlights, which we're going to talk about today. I've read that, and I'm looking forward to discussing it. There's all sorts of things I want to talk to Matthew about, and so hopefully we'll have a stimulating conversation. That's my guess. So let's start with, well, we can start with whatever you want to start with, but let's start with the book, I think.
Yes, sir.
Tell me why you wrote it, and when you wrote it, and what you want people to know about it.
Yeah, so I've been keeping journals since I was 14 years old. And so I guess starting 15 years ago, I always carried this treasure chest full of the journals I'd been keeping, and they were filling up that treasure chest. And I would take it with me to any place that we went for an extended amount of time, put it over there to the right of my proverbial desk and go, have it there, because if you get the itch and you get some time, I dare you to go in that treasure chest and see what's in there. Well, I've threatened to open up that treasure chest and see what those journals held for the past 15 years. Didn't have the courage really to open it up. Didn't want to make the time to go in there because I was intimidated of looking back at 50 years or however many years of my life. I'm not one for really liking to look back over my shoulder. I'm somebody who likes to, I'm still someone who rather enjoys making the sandwich more than eating it. I like making my movies more than I even like watching them. I like doing things, moving on, and heading forward. So,
well, you must have had some idea too when you were making those journals, at least in principle, that you owed an obligation to yourself at some point to look back over them. And I can see that would be intimidating because you're creating a task for yourself, a
Yes.
task of reconsideration and contemplation, I suppose.
Well, my excuse was, when I die, Camilla will open them up, and if there's something worth sharing, she'll do it, which wasn't used in martyrdom, if there's something worth it. So I, maybe it was coming across 50. Unconsciously, I didn't think about 50 as a number of a time to be retrospective, but I had some time on my hands, and I had read an article in the New York Times that a young man had written, and I liked the article. I go, oh, this guy gets me, in a way that it was the first article I read where he had weaved all different times of my career and life into a thread, instead of sort of like saying he was this then and now he's this, and this then and now he's this. So he'd strung them all together, and I liked his style of writing, and I asked him to come on and be a ghostwriter for a book. We met one time. It was a good meeting. We thought it was going to be a book, a little hardback book that you could put on the back of the toilet that every college kid could take to school and could open it up any page, maybe read a truthism or a bumper sticker or something, and have a little aspiration to head about their day. Well, the New York Times pulled him off because evidently they weren't allowing any of the writers to work with celebrities. And just as he got pulled off, and I was in the room, my office with Camilla, my wife, I said, I think I need to find a new ghostwriter. And I stopped at the same time she stopped. And she said, you know what this means? And I went, yeah, I do know what it means, which is I need to go off and write it myself. So she said, I packed up all the journals. She said, don't come back until you got something. And I headed off with 15 gallons of water. I don't know how many pounds of red meat and my favorite libation. And I went away to the desert. The first 12 days were sort of no electricity, me with my journals, no cell reception, nothing like that. I wanted to be forced with nothing but my past, and find some entertainment in that at least. And I feared being embarrassed. I feared feeling ashamed. And I feared seeing a arrogant little SOB that I was in the past. And I crossed all those things in looking back at my last 50 years. But what I noticed was that a lot of things I thought I'd be embarrassed about, I giggled at. A lot of things I thought I'd be ashamed about, I had already forgiven myself for, or now forgave myself for. And a lot of the times where I was an arrogant little SOB, what I realized is that if I wasn't the arrogant little SOB at that time, I may not have had the confidence to put myself in a situation to get absolutely humiliated and humbled. So I sat down with the journals. I remember going into thinking it was going to be more academic, thinking that that's what it was. After day 5, I realized, no, there's actually more folk poetry in here and stories to tell than any academia. So I backed off and said, let's just see what the journals reveal themselves to be. And I ended up with 8 stacks of all the journals. I said, what are some themes? I had a big stack of stories, big stack of people, big stack of places, big stack of prescribes, big stack of poems, prayers, and bumper stickers. So I had these 8 stacks. I said, okay, now let's sift through those and see if we find a central theme. And that's where Greenlights came from. I found that I had engineered Greenlights in my life through responsibilities taken yesterday, which bore me freedom today. I found that I'd gotten just I have no reason why good fortune landed in my lap. There was no reason why, but I said, well, let's make some rhyme out of this and do something with it. I found that also a lot of my yellow and red lights, those things that we don't really like that slow us down or make us stop, all had lessons that they revealed to me, which then made them green lights, or at least gave them green light assets. And then I also found that that the art is sort of in approaching the yellow light. All
right, so we've reestablished ourselves in a wind-free zone. So look, one of the things, you struck me as an intensely likable character as a consequence of what you revealed in your book. I mean, I kept thinking, it would be a pleasure to spend time around this man. And I certainly saw no sign of arrogance in it. I saw a lot of thankfulness, and a conscious thankfulness, and I think implicit thankfulness as well. And a lot of love for your family, your parents, and your current family, and gratitude for that as well. And also, one of the things that struck me too was your integrity and decision-making with regards to your career. You talked about taking a break after being somewhat typecast in romantic comedies. I mean, very successfully typecast, and so there's nothing negative about that, but feeling that you had taken that as far as it could be taken, yes, productively and creatively, and then took a risk of really being bounced out of the system. I mean, one of the things I think that people perhaps don't understand about a society or a situation as intensely competitive as Hollywood is that it's virtually impossible to be successful there, and the probability that you'll fail, even if you are successful, is extremely high because the competition is beyond belief.
There's no help wanted signs.
No, definitely not. And so if you decide to do something like think, well, I've been successful in romantic comedies, but I don't want that anymore, you're throwing away something that's virtually impossible to attain, and then to imagine that you might recreate yourself in a different guise and be successful. It's a big risk. You see this often when actors fail to make the transition from television to the big screen, and that happens far more often than it doesn't happen, even if they have a very successful TV career. So all of that was extremely interesting. Now, okay, so you were out in the desert writing your book. How long did it take you to sort through all the material?
I went off into solitude 5 different times for 10 to 12 days apiece. The first trip out was to the desert for the first 12 days. And that was basically to see what I had. I came back from that feeling like I had something that was personal, that might be worthy of being between, two hardback covers. I remember writing early on going, okay, now you're gonna have a lot of people that are gonna buy this book, even if the words are crap on the page, because of who you are, McConaughey. And I said, you're gonna have a lot of people who are not gonna purchase this book, even if what you put on the page was awesome, because you're Matthew McConaughey. So I remember saying to myself, and one of the first things I wrote down, I was like, the words on the page need to be worthy of being put on the page if they were signed by anonymous, but at the same time need to be words that only Matthew McConaughey could have written. And that was sort of my little bubble going, because this is not about, you've read it, it's not about a celebrity book.
No, in fact, there's very little in it that's celebrity-like. I was actually struck by how infrequently you made reference to your to the milieu that you inhabited while you've been pursuing your career as an actor. There's no celebrity gossip in it. It's family centered and very intimate. I actually wanted, it left me wanting to know more about your career, and so we can also talk about that today, flesh that out. But so that was quite remarkable for, a celebrity memoir, let's say. It's a terrible way of phrasing it.
A memoir by someone who happens to be a celebrity.
Yeah.
Well,
it wasn't a celebrity memoir. It was an autobiographical meditation, I would say.
Okay, heard. I like that. So I went away. I came back the first 12 days. And I was like, okay, I think I got something. And then I'd come back, handle my honeydews at home, get everything back, make sure I didn't fall too much in the deficit of being a father and a husband back home. And then as soon as I could, head off again. I was fortunate to have a wife who was like, get out of here each time. When I came back, you could tell how, the first 12 days were like a purge. I mean, I came back and the whole family like saw me. I mean, I came back shedding tears. I had just sort of gone back and looked at 50 years of my life and had them down, and all of a sudden was crying. They were tears of joy of this love story that I was seeing, and to face certain things that I looked at in the past or forgot in the past or thought I forgot, but noticed that actually I'd remembered. It was a very earth shaking. My floor was moved in a good way.
Well, that's great that it was moved in a good way. That's a lovely thing to have happen to you when you're 50 and looking back.
Yes. And then 4 other trips. So 52 total days. I was in solitude. And then the next year and a half was basically editing it. And I didn't have as many of the stories in there early, which I would say served as sort of the narrative backbone throughout that string the whole piece together.
Yeah.
And intermittently in there, I'll put a poem, a prescribe, a prayer, or something that will either call back. I looked at them like in movies, like they're a flashback or a flash forward. And can they, coming out of a story, tell the reader, oh, this is how I saw the situation that you just read? Or can it propel you into the next story? Because the stories are really more chronological, that take you from 4 years old to 50. And I didn't have as many of the stories in there. And so the next year and a half was going, okay, I've got these stories. My editors, I would tell them, she was like, oh, geez, you got to put that in there. And that's when it became, again, I was hesitant about the word memoir. I don't have a great relationship with the word memoir. The word memoir always seems like, good night, everybody. I'm heading off into the twilight of my career, the sun's setting, have a look. And I was like, I don't want any, because I need these stories to be active because they are still active. And so telling them, as long as they had a vitality that they felt active, which they felt like they were. And then I had that thing that is so obvious when you say it, but it didn't feel obvious to me at the time, which was the more personal I got, the more I started to notice that it was probably more relatable. The more into the I that I went, the subjective, the more I noticed that, it's actually more relatable to more of the human condition. And that was my hope.
Well, you have it's a collection of great stories. And part of the good fortune of your life is to have had those experiences that transform themselves into compelling stories without, without undue editing. The African story, for example, the dream story, that was quite remarkable. For me, that was a highlight of the book, I would say, where you related the dream you had, a recurring dream, or at least one that recurred twice, and on the basis of that dream, voyaged to South America and to Africa. Is that? I hope I've got that right.
The second time I had the dream, which was the exact same dream, 11 frames, 11 seconds. The second time I had it is when I chased down the first half of the dream, which was South America. I thought I'd finished it. Then 5 years after that, I had the dream for the third time, which made me say, I got to chase down the second half, which was there were African tribesmen on the banks of the river to the left. And that's when I went to Africa.
Any idea why? I mean, you staked a lot on the pursuit of a dream. And I mean, maybe we could say that's the motif of your book, that you staked a lot on the pursuit of a dream, but it's much more concrete in that episode, you had an actual dream, a literal nighttime dream that recurred. And as a consequence of that, you took a large risk, or a series of risks. Merely going to Africa was a risk, I would say. And not something that would be expected. It's quite out of the ordinary to do that, obviously.
Well, I've had dreams that are similar to each other, but it's the only dream I've ever had that one was so specifically, I mean, it was exact. When I say 11 frames, I mean like film frames, picture, 1, 2, 3, for 11 seconds, the exact same frames, exact same editing sequence in my mind, 11 seconds, that ended in such a, I don't know if ironic's the right word, it was the elements of a nightmare, but it was the opposite of a nightmare. It was a wet dream. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that it was the exact same dream that I've had once in 92, again in 96, whoa, I had that twice, that's the first shake-up. Well, that was the exact same dream I had 4 years ago. Exactly, first time that's ever happened. Oh, maybe that's a celestial suggestion here. Something is telling me.
What do you think you specifically learned in pursuit of that? And have you had the dream again? My guess would be no, that you probably exhausted it, but I might be wrong.
No, I have not. To this point, it seems that I fulfilled the dream in the trip to Africa, which was the two elements of the dream. One was the Amazon River, one were African tribes. Those are the two geographic elements that I knew that were crystal clear in the dream. So that's why I went to South America. That's why I went. I have not had it again. I mean, I'll say this. I'm always looking for a good reason to go for a walkabout. So I found a really good reason, a concrete reason there. And why were they wet dreams? There was nothing overtly sexual about them. There was, so they were, spiritual in that way is how I took them. Now in Mali, I can say, and I've been back to Mali. I went back to Mali, as I write about in the book, 5 years later after I fulfilled the dream. Not because I had the dream again, just because Mali, I've never felt more at home in a place than Mali. Now you're in certain places, you're like, I've been here before. The gravity here is right. I've been here before. Whether it's another life, I don't know. But Mali was where I felt, this is home. This was the original home. I've been here. And so that's when we went back. So that's my favorite place to go. And I've been back and did the exact same trip I did when I chased down the second half of the dream.
And you shed your identity to a great degree when you went to Africa.
Yeah.
And so that may enable you to exist in a way that would be much unlike the manner in which you have to exist where people know where you are or who you are. What do you think that did for you? Like the dream, you took this dream quest, let's say, and you paid a price for it. The risk would be the price. Mm-hmm. What was the consequence of allowing yourself to do that?
That it was on me, that it was my doing. I could own it at a time of becoming famous. You go through, at least I did, and still do at times, go through, wait a minute, what's mine? What am I getting based off of my worth as the man I am, as the person I am? Forget my fame. And it becomes challenging. I want to know, what is it's real? What is it not? How many of those I love yous are meant, or how many of them were just following because I just had a big box office hit? And wait a minute, the person that I've had dinner with their kids and spent Christmases with, who have shared I love yous and hugs, then now I have 2 movies that didn't do well and that person won't return my call. Wait a minute, what all matters? What do I want to do? What are we doing here? So,
if you have a reputation that has a life of its own, it becomes very difficult to distinguish between yourself and that reputation.
Sure.
And that's one of the pitfalls of fame. And lots of times you see people sacrifice themselves to their reputation. You see celebrities becoming impersonators of themselves.
Yes.
And it's a tragic fate, I would say. And
well, that's when you go, who's wagging who? I've never wanted my fame to wag me. I mean, like, no. I understand I got famous because of who, to whatever extent, because of who I am. And what did I do? I
could see in the book that you were snapping yourself out of your fame, even while you were doing things like the motorhome adventures, because you were living a life that certainly wasn't what I expected to read, that you would voluntarily abandon what so many people value as like the pinnacle of cultural achievement, say at the popular level, and shed all that and set out like any person who doesn't have that.
Right. Well, what I was like, for instance, in the South American trip, and it happened in the Mali trips and all the walkabouts, I needed to go to a place where I'd just become famous too. I mean, my world was like, all of a sudden, all the options were mine. Mm-hmm. And 2 days before, none of those options were there. And now it was a world of yes. And I'm going, I only got 24 hours in a day and I would do any of this work. And you're now telling me I can do it all?
Yeah.
You're asking me to be discerning right now? And again, I went away to go, I need to go where someone doesn't know my name. I need to go away where no one's seen my movies. I want to go where there's no electricity. I want to go someplace where those hugs and tears when I say goodbye 22 days later are based only off of the man they met 22 days ago.
Well, you managed to abandon them too. One of the problems with being famous is, and I suspect this is particularly the case with the kind of fame that you have, is that it must be very difficult to distinguish between people wanting something from you and people enjoying your company and liking you. And it might even be difficult for them to distinguish between those things, because fame is a very difficult thing to deal with, even as an onlooker, even as a family member. You wrote about your mom's reaction, for example. She became a fangirl to some degree, and that would be definitely disconcerting.
Yes, it was. Yeah, I had 8 years there where my mom and I needed a mother. And what on the other end of the phone was a fan of my fame, someone who wanted my fame more than I did.
Great. Well, it shows you the power of that too, because your mother obviously cared for the person you were before you became famous, but she was overwhelmed, and it's not surprising. I mean, to some degree, the entire Hollywood apparatus exists to manufacture fame that's overwhelming. That's its whole, I can't say that's its whole purpose, but that's what it uses to drive, let's say, to drive people to the theater. So to be victimized by that, to fall under the sway of that is unsurprising. It's surprising that it could be resisted. And that was certainly, you could certainly see that with your mother's response.
Oh, for sure.
And I'm sorry, I don't remember. Is your mom still alive?
Yes, she is. She's 88 years young and with us right now.
So, and has that situation rectified itself? Did she adapt to?
We both adapt.
Yeah.
I got through enough time where I felt stable enough in my career that I was like, her loose lips aren't going to sink my ship. And actually, I let go the reins. And as soon as I said, you go, Mom, here's the mic. Hit that red carpet line. You can talk to anybody. You tell, no filter. Sell whatever stories you want. 99% of the time, it's awesome. And I'm like, you know what? Let her enjoy it. And I was able to enjoy it. And then come to that, realization that, I wasn't going to change her. So because I couldn't change her, it's kind of like the sabbatical I took from the rom-coms. I wasn't going to change her, so I just had to kind of block her out for a certain amount of time that ended up being 8 years until I was stable enough to go for it. And our relationship's great. And all through that time, she didn't love me less. She's loved me in a new, different way, as well as being her son. What I was needing was I needed her to double down on being a mom to me. Where instead of, she didn't double down, she didn't even cut it in half. She kind of was really wanting to know about the fame part. And I remember telling her things like, well, you keep wanting to come out here and see me, but what if I was an accountant in Chicago? Would you want to come see me as much? And my two brothers were like, you don't want to come see us as much. You want to see little brother? And we were like, yeah, we get it. So we call her out. And it was a strange 8 years. I never questioned her love for me, though. I knew we were going to be fine. I knew we weren't going to head to our deathbeds going on a bad note. I knew we were going to come out the other side. It was just a matter of when, and we did.
Yeah, well, it's nonetheless a good example of one of the unintended consequences of fame, right? Is that this very profound alteration in the nature of your personal relationships. So
yes.
So I want to switch topics a bit. I've been watching you in True Detective, which my son recommended, and I'm really enjoying. I believe you said in the book that the script leapt off the page for you.
It did, especially the words of the character Rustin Cole.
Right, who you play.
Marty Hart role that Woody played.
Yes. You were offered that role.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I read the thing, and I remember telling him, I said, guys, I understand why you're coming to me for Marty Hart. I go, but the guy who I cannot wait to turn the page to see what comes out of his mouth is this guy, Rustin Cole. And they were a bit surprised.
Yeah, well, they're both complex characters, so you could see that either of them might have been attractive. But I was quite struck by your characterization of Cole. It reminded me of Heath Ledger. And that's why I wanted to talk to you about it. You play a dark character very well, if you don't mind me saying so. I mean,
thank you.
It's believable. I've known some dark people, and your portrayal is believable, very believable. And so that makes me wonder what price you pay for that. It's kind of a cliche, you play a dark role and it invades you, but it isn't obvious to me how you can play a dark role without it invading you. And then, or at least you have to allow something dark in yourself to come out and respond to that. And you're very different on the screen playing Rustin Cole than you are in a romantic comedy role, clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's somewhat surprising to see that transition, which I guess is why other people might be surprised by that too, which is why you actually had a bit of a hiatus when you stopped taking rom-com roles. But I'm curious, what were the consequences for you of playing that character in particular, but dark characters in general?
The dark characters, the baddie, usually has so much more identity than the white knight, than the hero in stories that I read in scripts and things. The dark characters and are also they're always usually outsiders, and the consequence is that if I'm really going to portray one of those well, that part of myself, I'm putting myself on an island, and that excites me. I want to feel like the underdog. I want to feel like I don't have to pander to manners or graces. I'm living by different rules. And not even to prove a point, but just say in a Rustin Cole's position, someone who just, I didn't make big acting choices with Rustin Cole. I just did what I could to understand the text so well that I could just say it and not have to solicit it. Or again, Rustin Cole was a guy who preferred his own company to anyone else's, and that solitude. That was a vacation for me. Also, as a person who's a believer, to have to be inhabit a character who is not a believer at all, and here's why. I've always thought this was odd. At the time that I chose and wanted to go inhabit Rustin Cole was the time that my faith was strongest.